Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with the first episode of the Manitoba 2023 provincial election forecast. Now, what's the deets? What's going on in Manitoba? Well, it's not great for the PCs. It's fantastic for the NDP. I think it is very accurate and safe to say at this point in the election, which hasn't started yet, we're in June, we're going into the summer, we don't have the most polls in the world. So we shouldn't put too much stock in the results right now, but I think the results are indicative of the environment in Manitoba. And if you are from Manitoba, feel free to comment below anything you have read, seen, or heard locally. Sometimes things do not cross provincial borders that well when it talks about provincial politics, especially when you are not one of the quote-unquote core four, which is Alberta, BC, Ontario, and Quebec. Those four get talked about way more across provincial boundaries, whereas something like Manitoba or my home Nova Scotia is really not talked about that much outside of like the really hardcore election analyst circles. But even then, not necessarily a lot. So where are we here? What is the story? Well, the PCs won a solid majority in 2019. Unfortunately, COVID happened. And just like how in Alberta, COVID and the reaction to COVID was threatening to disintegrate the PCs as it threatened to disintegrate the UCP, in both cases resulting in the incumbent premier, in cases of Alberta, Jason Kenney, in the case of Manitoba, Brian Pallister, to resign, and a leadership election to happen. What to me seems to be the main difference between the two races and the two provinces right now politically. And I should also note here that both provinces seem to have a competent NDP leader opposing the Conservative Party. Now, as I said earlier, it's harder to get information from about Manitoba specifically. It does not cross lines very much, and I'm not sure which Manitoba papers are good. So if you know any of those, comment below so I can take some reading into them as we get closer to the election and it becomes more relevant. So, what is the difference? Why did Danielle Smith cruise in the end to a comfortable majority in popular vote and a less but still comfortable majority in seats? And it's only less in that there were some close seats, but probabilistically is a pretty reasonable distribution of close seats. Why is Stephenson different? Well, I think the best way to look at this and the best way to understand this is two factors. Manitoba is less conservative than Alberta. The rural parts of Manitoba, as seen here, are as conservative as Alberta, more or less. There's some differences, there's some variance, but they're very conservative. Oftentimes, they can be very difficult to poll because there's large populations of people like Mennonites and other people who just don't use phones or cell phones or whatever, are hard to get reach to. Those groups overwhelmingly tend to be conservative as well. So usually the rural areas are actually slightly underpolled for the PCs. The two big differences, though, is de facto Manitoba is more urban, even though Winnipeg is a smaller city. And unlike Alberta, Oil and gas isn't really an industry in Manitoba. There might be some oil and gas production. I don't really know. I've not looked offhand. But it's not the major industry it is in Alberta, where it's 30% of the province's GDP, with mining and agriculture being another 35 combined, if I'm remembering correctly. That's not the case in Manitoba. In a similar regard, and possibly a consequential result of that, Manitoba is a lot poorer than Alberta. And generally speaking, poor urbanites are more open to the NDP than more affluent urbanites are. Now, you might ask yourself, what do I mean by Winnipeg is more urban? It is objectively a smaller city. It's about, let's say, 750,000, maybe 800,000 people. Calgary and Edmonton are both about 1.3 million, depending on how you want to draw the boundaries. But I think it's 1.3 according to Stats Canada. How possibly could I say Manitoba is more urban then? Or Winnipeg is a more urban city? Well, the reason I say that is it's the relative characteristic. Winnipeg and its surrounding urban area, its surrounding census metropolitan area, is not just about 800-ish, is about 800-ish thousand people, as I said. And on paper, with Manitoba's about 1.4 million population, that seems more open for the Conservatives. Usually rural areas vote Conservative, urban areas are less willing to. 800,000 on 1.4 million is actually a very similar ratio to Alberta, and a smaller city, Winnipeg, is. Usually the bigger the city, the more it changes. More conservative, or less conservative it is. Or at least urban area. Because the GTA is not one city, but it's one urban area, and it's the size of the urban area. It's the urban density that changes political viewpoints, not the action of living in a city. You can be in a small city, but if you're in a large urban area, that doesn't really matter. Markham is not going to be very distinct to Toronto as de jure city, population-wise. Now, the difference, though, is Winnipeg is the only city of real consequence in Manitoba. Yes, you can look at Brandon or Steinbach or Morden Rinkler, which I think technically all count as cities, though I'm pretty sure some of these are pretty tiny. Let's just check this over here. Steinbach is technically a city, but it is 18,000 people. We're not talking about a very big spot. Morden Winkler is about the same, and I think Brandon might be in the realm of 50, but that's pretty small still. So what does this mean? Well, it means all of the urban population is concentrated in one area, so proportionally and relatively, it feels more urban to Manitoba than Calgary feels to Alberta. Or you could even say, really, Vancouver feels to BC. They're all roughly the same proportion when you consider Edmonton and Calgary combined, that is, of the population. But Winnipeg votes sharply to the left of the province, whereas Edmonton, sure, it votes sharply to the left, but Calgary is average. It's neither left nor right relative to the province. And yes, you could argue the Greater Vancouver area tends to vote to the left of the province, but not to the same degree. Though it is quite left-wing compared to the province. Winnipeg is different, though. It combines a couple of factors that make it a difficult city for Conservatives. Not an unwinnable city. They have won it. Just last election, Brian Pallister won Winnipeg suburbs handily, easily. Easily, maybe not, but handily. 2016, he won them. It can happen. It's not that out there. The difference, though, this is an important difference, is Winnipeg has lots of universities. I think 3, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe 4. I didn't think to do a count, but same difference, pretty much. It has all of the provincial bureaucrats. It has lots of federal bureaucrats in the city. And it's shockingly poor. Though, not much more poor than Manitoba as a whole. Manitoba is a fairly poor province, as is Nova Scotia. Sad. We feel you there. I feel you, Manitobans. I feel you. But all of those things make it a city easily winnable for the NDP. And that is what we're seeing here. The NDP in Manitoba, presently with present voter coalitions and present leadership, these can all change depending on coalitions and leadership and whatever in campaigns. But presently, the NDP is more efficient voter-wise. If you look here, with a 7-point lead in the popular vote, they are winning by about 9 seats. Now, I didn't run this the other way, but when I check this to try to figure out how much the PCs need to move it by to come up and win, how much ground does Stephenson need to regain? Well, she needs to gain 5 points herself, and the NDP need to lose 5 points for a 10-point swing. And that puts her at 44 and the NDP at 41. And that gives it a 1-seat win, 29 to 28. That kind of gives you the idea of the voter efficiency the NDP has in Manitoba right now. A 3-point lead from the PCs is a bare, tiny, thinnest of margins win. If we scale this up to a 7-point win, bear with me, I had to do this live because I didn't think to do this beforehand. Yeah, we scale this up to a 7-point win. Interestingly, it flips. So you might ask yourself, and I ran the numbers beforehand just to be clear. I didn't just run these numbers live. I just didn't have the numbers in front of me, like popular vote wise. Weird, but whatever. So what is the details? Wait. When you get 46.8 to 39.5, roughly the same lead, that's the earliest you get to about 33 seats for the PCs. You might notice that that's also a 7-point lead. So does that defeat the voter efficiency argument? No. Because we're gonna dive a bit into stats here. I don't have any diagrams or graphics because I don't have the budget for this. I don't have the time to do this. But we're gonna paint a picture with We're gonna paint a picture with paint, our most powerful tool of the world. paint. So we're going to pick this orangey color for the NDP, and we're going to draw a line. So the NDP vote, so like, okay, wait. First, we're going to have this as an axis. We're going to have whoop, whoop. This is seats, and this is votes. Go here for the NDP. The NDP is like that. That's their S-curve. We go to the PCs, their S-curve is like this. Okay. Does it make sense? The PCs have a lower floor, a higher floor and a higher ceiling. But the NDP has a better critical band. By that I mean, that was terrible. Right here, this is where the critical thing is, because this is like 40 to 50 PV right here, right? Popular vote. 40 to 50% of the vote. Here, the NDP has a better, more efficient vote share than the PCs. If you start getting into if the PCs start approaching the high 40s, their vote share is more efficient. If you're in the high 30s to the mid 40s, which we're kind of right here, the NDP has a better vote share. And these are two graphs superimposed on each other. These two lines are independent, just to be clear. So if we are right here for the PCs, that does not mean we're right here for the NDP. We're probably right here for the NDP and right here for the PCs. Like the NDP are pretty much near their ceiling in seats. I think you could reasonably say they could pick up 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5. Let's say they can pick up 5 more seats. 38 might be their ceiling. Conversely, we're at 24 for the PCs, and the PCs could, as they have in the past, like just the last election, they had 36 seats. And that was down from 2016. They had lost seats from the previous election. So the PCs have a much higher ceiling and a much higher floor. The difference is the NDP vote is more efficient where it matters. And it's more efficient where it matters because Winnipeg is proportionally very urban. It's a fairly dense city. It's not the densest in Canada, but it's a fairly dense city. It has lots of university-educated voters who are younger and tend to skew more idealistic. So they are more likely to vote for left-wing parties because presently in Canada, left-wing parties are more idealistic than the right. The right tends to be very pragmatic. And Winnipeg is fairly poor, and it has lots of bureaucrats in it. Two groups that do heavily vote left. And then you can also consider second-order effects. They have lots of teachers, lots of doctors, also groups that vote left. Nurses as well. At least left relative to their other indicators. For example, doctors might vote to the left of doctors, of like rich people. Like, I don't recall the income of a doctor, but doctors are all in the 100K plus band, right? They vote to the left of the 100K voters, income voters, though they probably don't vote much to the left of voters as a whole, if that makes sense. Because 100K plus household income voters vote to the right of everybody else, usually. Except Alberta, apparently. They voted par, by the way, in Alberta. At least according to my math. Which my math is pretty good, so I think that's probably accurate. But who knows? We don't have exit polls, so we can't compare that. So now the other factor we have here, so we already touched on as just the basis here, that the map and the demographics aren't great for the PCs right now. It would be different if the NDP has been in government for 8 years. But who's been in government for the last 8 years? It's the PCs. So they are battling an unfavorable popular vote picture, where they need to win by quite a bit to win. And they've had a bunch of damage done to them by COVID. They have about 20-ish% of their base, depending on the polling, who doesn't want to vote PC again. 20%. That's a lot of voters. That is almost entirely why they are losing right now. Now, if you look at the polls and you dive deep into them, about 10% of them are either undecided or will not vote again. And if they don't want to vote again, say la vie. But usually the will not vote again and undecideds of party partisans, and partisans as they voted for the party in the previous election, can be rallied by a decent campaign. So we could easily see Stephenson gain in the realm of 3 points. NDP might lose 2, let's say 2.5. NDP lose 2.5, and the PCs could gain 2.5. Be some seats, make the Winnipeg losses look less bad. Probably see 2 or 3 more Winnipeg seats go PC. Still a loss. What's really, to me, holding the PCs down going into this election is where Wab Canoe. By the way, please correct me in the comments if I'm pronouncing this wrong. I have a really bad history of just completely butchering the pronunciation of a party leader's name for like months. No one told me until like the day before the election that Notley's name was pronounced Notley. And I just failed. So let me know in the comments if I'm pronouncing this wrong, but I think it's Wab Canoe. I think that's how I pronounce it. That's how I will pronounce it with my English accent. Or Nova Scotian accent. Anyways. He seems more dynamic and more interesting than Stephenson is. Stephenson really seems like the very pragmatic, managerial establishment person. And we don't get to see much news about Manitoba, but it seems like she's managing Manitoba fine. With the caveat being no provinces are really doing good right now, so fine doesn't mean much. Stephenson might be doing par with every other leader in the country, every other premier in the country. As good a job as everyone else. But if every province is doing bad and you're doing as good as everyone else, that doesn't really say much. And unlike people like Ford, unlike people like Higgs or Smith or Moe, she's not very interesting. She's very pragmatic to the point where it's very difficult to actually say what she believes. And I think that's really going to hold her back. I think if the PCs ended up going with a more dynamic, more assertive, more interesting leader, they would probably be in a better position right now. Whereas a relatively bland centrist doesn't really give anyone any reason to vote for her. Why would you turn out to vote for a bland milquetoast person you don't really know what she believes, and well, she seems to be doing as good as every other premier, but every other premier sucks. Well, I'm going to phrase this. No province is doing good right now, so saying you're doing as good as everyone else doesn't really... not saying much. Like, if Canada was doing amazing right now, the economy was booming and all that stuff, saying that Stephenson seems to be doing as good as everyone else would be fine. No one would care, right? And possibly that might be Stephenson, an unfortunate reality for Stephenson. Maybe 10 years ago, or 10 years from now, She could run the exact same position she is, do the exact same thing, and she could have stupendous results with it. Because if everything's going well, people don't really care if you're bland. But if things aren't going well, and I don't think anyone can reasonably say with healthcare being in crisis, housing being in crisis, wages stagnating, per capita worker productivity falling across the country, I don't think anyone can say the status quo is good in Canada right now. So if the status quo isn't good, and you're in charge, and you're boring, how are you going to motivate people to vote for her? If the exercise I want you to think about in your heads here for the next little bit, because I don't know when the next update for this series is going to come out, because it depends on polling. But an exercise to think in your head. If you were knocking on doors for Stephenson, trying to convince a voter to vote for Stephenson, what do you tell them? What does she believe? What are her goals? What are her motivations? What is she like as a person? There are answers to all of these questions. Whether they're publicly available, I'm not sure. But what I can say with the information I do know is I think I would have a very difficult time exercising this. What is there to say? And that is a major problem going into an election. Especially since Wab Kinew seems to be a more dynamic person. When everything sucks, the dynamic leader will usually beat the bland one. Will that happen? Hard to say. There is potential light for Stephenson. We look to be maybe on the precipice of a snap election in New Brunswick. And if the snap election does occur, and Blaine Higgs does walk away with another majority, and this will be sometime in the summer, especially if he gains popular vote and or seats, Stephenson has a chance, I think, to go somewhere. To make this an election about her, what she's doing for Manitoba, as opposed to what Wab Kinew wants to do. Because that's what this election is going to be about in October. Unless Stephenson does something interesting, something dramatic, something possibly controversial even. If she plays it safe and plays it bland, the election's going to be about Wab Kinew's agenda, and it will live and die on whether he's any good at selling it. I can't tell you right now if he is going to be good, because who knows? Maybe he's going to fall on ice. We can't say. We can't say yet. But that's a bad position to be in. You don't want the election to be decided by your opponent making a mistake. So, if Higgs wins a snap election soon on the topic of informed consent for parents about their child name changing and gender identity changing in school, if that turns to a winning issue for Higgs in New Brunswick, it puts a blueprint for Stephenson to do something interesting, something affirmative. Will she follow through with it? No, I actually don't believe she will at all. Even if Higgs walked away with a landslide, overwhelming majority where he wins every single winnable seat he could possibly win, I don't think she will do it. Because she's bland and moderate. She doesn't seem to be the kind of person who wants to do a controversial action. Even if it's the only thing that might be able to save her political future. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she's going to win in October. I don't believe it. And I think when she does lose in October, the election is going to the reason for that isn't the failures of the PC government, isn't the campaign necessarily of the NDP, isn't the personality or character of Wab Kinew. It will be down to the personal failure of Stephenson to really put anything interesting on the table, anything to appeal to voters in a time of chaos and economic hardship. Now, you could reasonably say that what Blaine Higgs is doing in New Brunswick isn't anything to do with the economy, and you're correct. But that doesn't matter. He's doing something. He's making an issue and taking it by the balls and owning it. Voters have an idea what he is. Will it pay off? We'll find out. Well, at some point I'll have a New Brunswick model up, assuming that by-election or a snap election does occur. But until then, we are where we are. Stephenson appears to be losing. But with that, I bid you all adieu. If you like the video, forgot this, make sure you press like, share, subscribe, comment below anything you wanted to say. I hate doing this YouTube shilling stuff, but you got to because, interestingly enough, it works. And I hate that it works. Because I hate having to do this, but you got to do it because reminding people to do things it works. If you don't remind someone to do it, they're not going to do it. So do all the YouTube things. Help me out. Be a cool bro. And I will see you hopefully next week with either Canada or New Brunswick. It depends on if a snap election happens. If there's no snap election, it won't be New Brunswick, obviously. If there is a snap election, it depends a bit on how much work I can get done. But I've done this enough times. I'm pretty sure I can spin up a model in a week, but we'll see. But with that, I bid you all adieu, and I will see you on next Monday.